Brazil might have one of the most diverse and proud tabletop gaming communities in the world, but did you know that the RPG that defined a whole generation of this hobby there was Vampire the Masquerade? In the 90s, Vampire the Masquerade was released in Portuguese, and it became a cultural phenomenon. It brought thousands of players into the hobby, it made the news due to some moral panic related to murders at the time, and it even started the whole LARPing movement in Brazil. This is kind of a story and the lore of how Vampire became the most popular RPG in Brazil at one point, and from there, how Brazil developed one of the most unique, diverse, and passionate communities of RPG players in the world. Hi, my name is Lee, and let's dive into some TTRPG history today. The first RPGs arrived in Brazil in the 1980s, but they didn't come through bookstores or game shops. They were kind of mostly brought in from students who were studying abroad, and they brought foreign language rulebooks back in their luggage and distributed them out to their friends. So a lot of the time, they were photocopied by hand and passed around between friends, and that kind of laid the foundation for what would become Brazil's first generation of RPG players, also nicknamed the Xerox generation. At that time, RPGs were pretty much entirely confined to universities or elite colleges, people who had the money to send their kids to study abroad. There were not any official translations of English language books, and there weren't any local publishers yet, and not any real commercial scene. That began to change in the early 90s. So the first RPG books officially translated into Portuguese were the Fighting Fantasy series and GURPS, which is like a generic universal system that can be played in any genre. Soon after, Brazil saw the release of their own first domestically local RPGs like Tagmar, which is a classic fantasy inspired by Tolkien-ish kind of vibe, and, say it again. Desafio dos Bandeirantes. It's a unique game rooted in Brazilian history. So in 1993, the black box version of Dungeons & Dragons was released in Brazil. And also in that same year, Brazil hosted its first major RPG convention called the Encontro Internacional de RPG. At its peak, it became the second largest convention of its kind for RPGs in the world after Gen Con. And if you've been to Gen Con, you know these things are massive. So, it's saying a lot. So at that time, the community was still small in Brazil, but it was growing rapidly. And then soon after came Vampire. In 1994, Vampire the Masquerade was released in Portuguese by Devir, which was one of the big publishing houses at the time. It was an instant hit. Tens of thousands of copies were sold, and Vampire introduced a very different style of role-playing compared to something like Dungeons & Dragons, which was very conflict-driven and high fantasy setting, It wasn't about treasure or monsters. There was a lot of drama, there's moral conflict, and there's personal horror, and it was just very appealing for the Brazilian population. They connected deeply with the tone of Vampire, the game's themes of secrecy, betrayal, religion, power battles. I think it echoed maybe some cultural tensions that were already a part of everyday life in Brazil. Brazil is a country shaped by Catholicism, spiritual syncretism, and generations of political uncertainty. So a game about hidden societies and moral decay didn't necessarily feel too out of left field. Vampire also fit the performative theatrical way that Brazilians like to tell stories, and role-playing from there became a kind of social ritual. Nothing captured that better than live-action role-playing, or LARPing, and most of these groups were playing Vampire. They began running massive Vampire events, and some of them had hundreds of players in costume acting out Vampire court politics in public all simultaneously. The LARP scene really spread from São Paulo to the countryside and all across Brazil, and Vampire became more than just a game. It really became like a subculture. If you LARPed, it was definitely going to be Vampire, and it became a huge phenomenon. But Vampire's popularity came with a cost. Between 2001 and 2005, there was a series of murders in Brazil that were falsely linked to RPGs. The most infamous case was the one of Aline Silveira Soares, a teenage girl who was found in a cemetery in Ouro Preto. The media went ballistic with this.
O crime teria acontecido depois de um jogo de RPG.
And they claimed that her death was part of a RPG gone wrong, that she had lost the game and she had been sacrificed as a result of losing the game, and this was her punishment. And there were news programs that were talking about satanic books and stuff that were found at the scene of the crime, and the books that they were showing happened to be RPG books like Vampire and D&D, and that was all it took for the general public to associate satanic, Satanism and cults and all that stuff with RPGs, and the result was a full-scale moral panic. So the immediate consequences of this moral panic was that in addition to the general society's perception of RPG playing as a very suspicious thing to do, was that a rating system was established for RPG books, and most of them ended up being classified as being for sale only to 18+, and the sale was even prohibited in some cities like Guarapari, which is where Aline Suarez was originally from. Around that time, publishers slowed the pace of publications of RPG materials, but it wasn't just this moral panic that was at fault. There were other factors like the accessibility of the internet, which allowed everybody accessing foreign materials much easier. So, book sales, I think in general, started to go down. The publication of D&D 3E, which also had the open gaming license, affected the sales of other games as well. And a lot of companies kind of pivoted and decided to focus all in that one basket instead. So over time, players managed to push back. Communities still formed to defend the hobby. Public perception began to shift away from this mass hysteria that the media did bring about. While Vampire was rising and D&D was kind of finding its niche in Brazil, Brazilian creators were creating their own games. In 1995, a satirical anime-inspired game called Defensores de Tokyo was released, full of pop culture references. It became a really popular game, a bestseller, and it remains to be one of the more popular TTRPGs today. After that came Tormenta. So Tormenta started in 1999 as a fantasy campaign setting created by the team behind Dragão Brasil, which was the country's leading RPG magazine that was first started circulating in 1994. Tormenta was created to be compatible with GURPS, AD&D, and Defensores de Tokyo. Tormenta RPG was released in 2010 and quickly became the most popular fantasy RPG in the country. Following the success of Vampire, the Brazilian publishing scene decided to invest in RPGs because, they were doing so well. The Abril Group, the biggest publishing corporation in Brazil, they took the rights for AD&D, Ediodo, had Shadowrun that they were publishing in 1995, and Devir, which was the company that was publishing both GURPS and Vampire, also started to invest in bringing Cyberpunk 2020 into Brazil in 1995 as well. D&D 3rd edition was released in 2000, and that came with the OGL and the D20 system license. So there was a steady line of D20 related games pretty much up until 2008. D&D 4th edition came out, but it wasn't super popular because of the restricted game license and the different rules, again, from the 3rd edition. So the companies that had previously invested in D&D would either abandon it or invested in other systems that were using the OGL. Tormenta, which was such a huge success from the campaign setting, the campaign setting was more popular than the official D&D campaign settings that were available to buy. And so following that success, Tormenta got its own RPG in 2010 with a D20 system of its own called Tormenta RPG. Local RPG magazine who comes out with their own campaign setting that becomes so popular that it turns into its own game and is now nationally beloved across the country. Doesn't that seem a little familiar? Today, Brazil's RPG community is bigger and more diverse than ever. There are massive communities on Facebook that are thriving, there's a strong OSR, old school revival scene, and there's a super strong indie scene as well with a lot of self-publishers. There are dozens of original Brazilian games. A lot of them are experimental, some are based on Brazilian myths, and most of them are only published locally and domestically, but it all reflects that a scene in Brazil is very much alive and very much evolving and definitely growing. There's also the modern new wave of streaming and actual play content that's growing in Brazil as well. One of the biggest names right now is Ordem Paranormal. or Paranormal Order, which is an original horror RPG created by the streamer Selbit. It's mixing supernatural themes with urban legends and kind of has like a Delta Green vibe and Supernatural, like the TV show. And it's got over 2 million followers. It started in 2020 around the pandemic. And so I think it really helped a whole generation of TTRPG players learn to be able to still connect online and still be able to play regardless of what the situation is. They've produced 7 seasons of his show, and it is the most watched actual play RPG in Brazil right now. It's a sign that Brazilian creators are no longer just importing ideas, they're focusing on making their own. Today, it's thriving as one of the most creative and original RPG scenes in the world. And we're really excited to see what's gonna come out of Brazil next. Now, we have a special guest with us here today to talk about his personal experience playing vampire in Brazil as a Brazilian. Please welcome Gabriel.
For me. Is this good? Okay, what do you got for me?
So, what was your experience like playing vampire?
So I didn't play, like when I was young, I started playing when I was 13, around 13, and I started on D&D, was the first book. Like I got Trevas, who is a Brazilian book first, but I never played, I just read it. Then I got D&D, and we used to play a lot of D&D in a LAN house, it was like an internet cafe. And we used to get there to play Magic, and then we would go to someone's house and play D&D. But Vampire, we never played when I was young. I only played when I was like 17, 18. I played Vampire because before people were like, oh, you were a kid, you're not ready to play Vampire. That's not like, you had to, it was D&D if you were young, it was Vampire if you were older. And also it was all the goth kids who play like Vampire. So you had to be like in the clique, you know, to play Vampire. So only later I get to know more people, and I was like, I really want to play Vampire, and I finally play Vampire, and it was really fun, and I loved it. But I grew up playing more D&D than Vampire. And I heard all the legends that people used to go to cemeteries and sacrifice people, and it just made it more interesting to me. I just wanted to play so badly. Yeah.
Did you ever do a vampire LARP?
No, I never did LARP. We just play like pen and paper, like sitting around the table. That was our style.
Did LARP?
Yeah, I knew people who LARP in the neighborhood.
It was all vampire?
Yeah, it was Vampire. It was always Vampire.
Great, thank you for your time.
No problem.
Thank you.
Take care. Good luck with the video.
Thank you so much for watching this today. A huge thank you to our patrons. It means a lot that you guys want to support us, and it really helps us. Yeah, huge thank you there. Head on over to our Patreon if you want to join the crew of these lovely people. I hope you found something interesting. I hope you learned a little bit. And if you have more insights on how the Brazilian RPG scene, it's a lot more diverse than everything that I covered today. Like there's a lot more that goes on. There's a lot of really awesome original games that come out of Brazil, but the scope is just so large, and I really wanted to know why Vampire became so popular at one point. Thank you so much for watching this, and we'll see you in the next one.